size group? Oh, group. Okay.
Because it's full, but not to overflowing, because it's more than 70 people.
Okay.
You have to have people moving around elsewhere.
Oh, I see. There's a. Oh, yeah. And the panel discussion is going to be here afterwards, or is that? Oh, in here.
Yeah, so in Warren Hall, which is right down the hall.
Okay.
We'll go in, get their lunch. Kids are going to go grab their lunch first, and then go down the stairs. So they make noise. And the rest of us will all go in and get lunch right about started.
Come back in here.
No, it's in
Oh, it's in there. Okay. Michael. He's here.
But actually, I need to get a fourth chair in there because it's Jeff.
Oh, yeah, Jeff as well. Yeah. Sure.
Good morning. Welcome to the Unitarian Church of Barnstable, Unitarian Universalists, where love guides us. I am Susan Starkey, our service leader this morning. We acknowledge that our church and lands rest upon unceded ancestral lands of Wampanoag people who have lived and been sustained in this territory for over 12,000 years. I extend a special welcome to our visitors and encourage you to join us after the service for soup and a panel discussion. More about that in a second. If you would like to know more about Unitarian Universalism or this congregation, please fill out a guest card which you will find in the pew rack in front of you, and return it to an usher or to Reverend Kristen Harper. Here, we celebrate the presence and participation of people who are gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, or gender nonconforming. Here, Black Lives Matter. We are also a green sanctuary, lifting up the climate and consumerist crisis in which we find ourselves and promote the values of a sustainable planet. In the spirit of welcome, please rise and embody your spirit and greet one another. This gentleman with the white shirt is my co-chair with FCEN.
Okay.
So there's a smattering of people from outside of this congregation. You may be seated. I invite your attention to the announcements written in the order of service, especially the one about today. So we're going to invite you all to a light lunch after the service, where our speaker, who we'll meet and hear about in a moment, will join Kristen for a panel discussion on hope, responsibility, and action, spiritual and religious voices rising for the earth. The Executive Director of Mass Interfaith Power and Light, Michael Reed, will also be on the panel, and author and Nauset Interfaith Association leader, Jeff Corrigan, will moderate. FCEN, the Faith Communities Environmental Network, is co-sponsoring this, and I and my co-chair, Russ Norris, look forward to sponsoring and hosting this event.
All creatures of the earth and sky, come and lift your voices high. Hallelujah, hallelujah. All herbs and fruits that richly grow, sing praise to God and sing praise to adoration. Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah.
We are pleased to have with us this morning our guest speaker, Gopal Patel, a leading Hindu environmental activist. Ours today is the first of 3 events that Gopal is bringing to Cape Cod. We're very happy to have you. I want to tell you a bit about him. Gopal is a globally recognized faith-based environmental activist, keynote speaker, and consultant who has dedicated his career to bringing the moral voice of religion into conversations about the planet's future. Guided by his Hindu spirituality, he has worked for 2 decades to demonstrate how spiritual traditions can help address the world's most urgent challenges. He has advised and worked with the World Economic Forum, the United Nations, Bloomberg Ocean Fund, and has given a TED Talk, which you can find, bringing together faith, science, and policy at the highest levels of global dialogue. Throughout his work, Gopal has focused on bridging the divide between faith and public policy, strengthening dialogue between Eastern and Western religious traditions. And this is why he is here with us today. He believes that solving global crises requires a whole of society approach in which faith communities play an essential role alongside scientists, policymakers, and civil leaders. And that is why the talk today is called From the Ganges to Walden to Cape Cod, How Water Connects Us Through Culture and Time. Let's see, Rue, would you light the chalice for us? We gave you the trick ones. We ignite this flame, thank you very much, symbol of our faith to beckon us into community, warm our hearts with love, and give us a light to follow as we carry our faith into action. Please rise and body your spirit and join in unison with the affirmation printed in your order of service. Love Church. The quest for truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge and freedom, to serve humanity in fellowship, to the end that all souls shall grow into harmony with the divine. Thus do we covenant together. And our children and youth affirmation: we believe in unity. We believe in community. We believe that each of us has the power to make a difference in the world. Thank you. Please remain standing for hymn 61, printed in your gray hymnal, number 61. have a ritual, a silent ritual called Pebbles of Joy and Concern. And I'd like to share a poem by Al Starkey that he wrote for us a few years ago to connect us all to this ritual. It's titled On the Verge. The reach of tide, the high water mark, the verge, the place of coming together and of separation, the community of sea and sand, of pilgrimage and solitude, always the telltale sign of rhythm and return, of distance and closeness, of silence and song, a tangle of seaweed and empty shells, a paste de mar. And beneath it all lies the pebbles, polished to perfection, with the wisdom of movement, the passage of time. Pebbles, vessels of rapture and suffering, loneliness and love, sureness and mystery, tragedy and hope. There in the verge, they wait to be touched and then forsaken by the tide. They wait to be lifted by someone who will pray with them, someone who will dare to find in them the face of God, someone who will fill them with their anguish and desires, someone who will release them into an ocean of deliverance. For all who would like to release your anguish and your desires, we invite you to come forward in 2 lines down the center aisle, pick up a pebble, hold it, and fill it with your joys or concerns, and then place it in our communal waters that symbolize compassion and renewal. We encourage everyone to take this time, whether you come up or not, just as a time for silent reflection. Our reading is from the Gray Hymnal, number 563, by Ralph Waldo Emerson. A person will worship something, have no doubt about that. We may think our tribute is paid in secret, in the dark recesses of our hearts, but it will out. That which dominates our imaginations and our thoughts will determine our lives and character. Therefore, it behooves us to be careful with what we worship. For what we are worshiping, we are becoming. For this church that inspires us to become our very best selves, the morning offering will now be received. Embody your spirit and join in the dedication and offering doxology printed in your order of service.
Morning, everybody. So wonderful to get to be here with all of you this morning. As many of you know, my name is Jen Shattuck, and I am the Children and Youth Program Assistant here at UCB. You will usually find me downstairs with our kiddos, but every now and then, I am given the gift of getting to be up here with you to tell you a story or tell you about something that is interesting to me. And this morning, I have the great good gift of getting to tell you about my friend, Henry. We are not really friends because Henry isn't technically alive anymore, but if he was alive, I like to think that we would be friends. Henry's full name is Henry David Thoreau, and he was born over 200 years ago. This coming July would actually be the 209th anniversary of his. Like me and like some of you, Henry grew up in the Unitarian Church, but not this Unitarian Church here in Barnstable, the Unitarian Church in Concord, which is just north of Boston. And even though he was alive so long ago, Henry is a pretty famous guy. He's so famous, you can even get giant posters of him. As I did yesterday on my pilgrimage to Walden Pond. One of the reasons that Henry is so famous is that he was a pluralist, which is a fancy word for a person who can hold a lot of ideas at the same time. Now, in Concord, most of Henry's neighbors were not pluralists. If you're a grown-up and you're staying in the service, you'll hear later on that some of his neighbors were people like him, but most of them were not. They thought there was only one way to be, and one way to think, and one way to worship, and if they heard a new idea, they would sort of wrinkle up their noses at it, the way that some people might with an unfamiliar food that showed up on their plate. What kind of face might you make if an unfamiliar food, I see some? Yeah, yes. You're wrinkling up your noses like, I don't know about this. So because so many people in Concord were like that, they did not pursue other ideas or perspectives. They didn't really seek out things that were new to them. But Henry wasn't like that. If ideas were food, he wanted his plate full of new ideas. He wanted the whole buffet of ideas, all the wisdom that the world had to offer. And one of his favorite sources of wisdom was a book called the Bhagavad Gita, or just the Gita, which is a Hindu holy book. Now it is fairly common for people who are not Hindu to read the Gita. But in Henry's time, it was not common. He was so inspired by the Gita, particularly chapter 6 of the Gita, that said, if a person was going to become wise, they should retire to a solitary place and live alone. They should exercise control over their body and mind. Henry was so inspired by this portion of the Gita that when he was 27 years old, he decided to follow its wisdom. And he went and bought the materials he needed to build himself a small house on the shores of Walden Pond. I was there yesterday. It is beautiful. If you have never been, I encourage you to go there. And he lived there for 2 years. 2 years, 2 months, and 2 days, following the wisdom of the Gita. He meditated and wrote, and he kept a garden, and he listened to bird song, and he even made friends with mice. And then after 2 years, he decided to end his experiment and go back to town. But so many of the things that he wrote, inspired by the Gita, went to go on to inspire others, including us here in the Unitarian Universalist Church. Like Henry, we are now pluralists. That is one of our values, pluralism. We can hold a lot of ideas at the same time, which is why when you come here, you're going to hear wisdom and ideas from every culture, from Hinduism and Judaism and Christianity and all of the cultures of the world. We believe in Unitarian Universalism that people can have different experiences of the world and different beliefs about the world and still come together in one community. I think Henry would have loved that. But he also would want us to do something else, which is to take pluralism out of this place and bring it into the world. You know, I love to give you homework. So here is your homework for the week. Out in the world, there is a huge buffet of ideas. Things we've never thought about or heard about or known about, right? They're presented to us every day. All of that new good stuff. We have a choice to make, right? We could go out there and we could wrinkle our noses up, make those faces for me again. But I don't know. I'm a little suspicious. But we don't need to make that face. What's the face we make when there's something on our plate we really want to eat? I see it. I see those faces, right? That's the attitude that we want when we're out in the world having these ideas come at us. Henry filled his plate from the buffet. We can fill our plate from the buffet. So this week, when you're out in the world, any new ideas that you encounter, we're going to make our happy and excited faces about those ideas, not our suspicious faces. And then we're going to come back, and you can come to me, and you tell me, what is one new idea that came to you? And I'll share mine too. Thank you so much.
I invite those who are going to the Children and Youth Center to do so now. The rest of us can rise and sing hymn number 413. Go now, please.
Good morning. These are selected verses from the Ganga Lahari Stotra of Jagannath Pandit. They are the most famous verses in praise of the river Ganges in India. You are the complete fortune of the whole world. You are that indestructible wealth of Shiva who playfully created the world. You are the sum and substance of the Vedas. You are the good fortune and personified beauty for the divine beings. May your waters destroy our sins. Even if it is remembered just once, it provides peace for the inner self. If it is sung, it immediately removes worldly torment and sin. May this word, Ganga, which is indeed pleasant to hear, shine in my lotus-like mouth at the very end of my breath. O divine river, You are not to be determined even by the Vedas. You are beyond the grasp of the mind and speech of the living. You are that entity which is shapeless, eternal, and pure, and dispeller of darkness by virtue of its glory. Therefore, you are not a worldly object. You are the indestructible abode of all faith. You are a means of new happiness. You are the most important of holy rivers. You are a pure mantle for all the three worlds. You are the solace for the mind. You are the dispeller of bad thoughts. May your body remove our distress. I have no protector, and you are soft with love. I have strayed from the path, and you provide the pious state. I am fallen, and you hold aloft the universe. I am stricken with disease, and you are the proven doctor. I am thirsty, and you are an ocean of ambrosia. I am a child, and you are the mother. Good morning. It's a real pleasure to be here with all of you today on the Cape. What a beautiful day. We are living in a moment of profound change. The old world, its assumptions, its institutions, its ways of organizing human life and our relationship with the natural world is visibly struggling. And the new world, whatever it may be, has not yet fully emerged. And so we find ourselves somewhat, perhaps in an uncomfortable space between the old and the new. And in this space of the in-between, it is natural to feel overwhelmed. Environmental change is all around us, from climate change to biodiversity loss, extreme weather, droughts and flooding, sharks in the Cape, whale populations declining. It can feel overwhelming. And it's natural to ask in this moment, how do we respond? How do we understand what is happening? And perhaps most importantly and personally, what is our contribution to this? I think there's maybe no better time to ask these kinds of questions than right now, when the old and the new are coming together. And I think I'm in good company because Emerson also believed the same. He said, if there is any period one would desire to be born in, is it not the age of revolution, when the old and the new stand side by side and admit of being compared? When the energies of all men are searched by fear and by hope? When the historic glories of the old can be compensated by the rich possibilities of the new era? He says, this time, like all times, is a very good time, if we but know what to do with it. So as I was thinking about this question about what to do in this time of change, I was thinking about this place, Cape Cod, which I've only been to once before, and I've been meditating on what this place means to us. And it feels like there's no maybe better place to ask this question than here, on the Cape, where the old world and the new world first met many years ago. And this year we celebrate the 250th anniversary of America. That threshold of the old and new feels more present now than ever. So this morning, we're going to use water as our guide. We'll explore the stories of three bodies of water, separated by thousands of miles in time, each carrying a teaching that may be helpful for us today. And each of these stories starts from a place of turmoil and change. None of them start from a place of peace They begin in crisis, and they find a way through it. We'll start on the banks of a river in India, travel to a small pond in Massachusetts, and then return home to the Cape to ask, what does it all mean for us in this moment? The river Ganges, as I said, doesn't start from a place of peace. It starts from a place of turmoil and grief and trauma. It's a story. Many Hindu stories are very long. I'll try to keep it very short. There was a king, and you have to stick with me. There was a king named Sagara, and he performed a sacrifice or a ceremony called an Ashvamedha ceremony, which was when you would let a horse run throughout the land, and wherever the horse ran, you could claim that as your kingdom, as the king. So he sent out a white horse to run across the land, to get as much land as he could. And somehow, and we don't know why or how, but the horse disappeared. So he was like, I need a new kingdom, my horse is gone. So he sends out, and this, wait for it, he sends out 60,000 sons that he has. He has 60,000 sons. And he sends out his sons to find where this horse has gone. And his sons are tearing up the planet, going everywhere to find this horse. And they come across a yogi in deep meditation, a yogi called Kapila. And they disturb the yogi's meditation. And so the yogi opens his eyes, and he is so furious that he's been disturbed in his meditation that he burns to ashes, just by his glance, all 60,000 sons. In a moment, they're all gone, burnt to ash. The king finds out about this. First he loses his horse, and then he loses his 60,000 sons. And he's in deep trauma and grief. That carries on for multiple generations. The trauma carries on. But he had a second wife. And the second wife, after a few generations, had a son called Bhagiratta. And Bhagiratta said, I need to rid our family of this intergenerational trauma. And so he meditated for 1,000 years. He meditated that, please, can this trauma and this grief be ridden from our family? And finally, Lord Brahma, who is the creator god within Hinduism, says, I will grant you, what do you want to remove this grief? And Bhagiratta says, please ask the river Ganges to descend from heaven to come to the earth so that these 60,000 sons can attain liberation. And Lord Brahma says, I can do that for you, but the force of this river will be so hard and fast that when it hits the planet, the whole planet will shatter. I cannot allow the Ganga to come down to planet Earth like that. And so Bhagiratta says, well, what if I was to ask Lord Shiva, who sits in the Himalayas, to first receive the river on his head before it touches the earth? And Lord Brahma says yes, and Lord Shiva agrees to this. So if you ever see a picture of Lord Shiva, he always has water coming out of his head. This is the river Ganges flowing from the heavens to Lord Shiva's head and then into the planet Earth. And so the river Ganges descends to earth, and then Bhagiratta takes the river, which forges a path for her throughout India to where the 60,000 sons, where their ashes were. As soon as the river touches the ashes, all 60,000 sons immediately attain liberation. So that's how the Ganges arrived on earth. But that's how it came, but what did it become afterwards is more important, I think, for our conversation here today. Diana Eck, famous Harvard philosopher, theologian, who's now retired, she called the Ganga embracing, nourishing, and forgiving. Embracing, nourishing, and forgiving. In Hinduism, the Ganges is actually called Ma Ganga, Mother Ganges, because she is a mother for everyone. No one is turned away from her banks. Regardless of one's socio-economic status, everyone can find shelter in the Ganges. And that's why she's given such high esteem within Indian history and Hinduism. I shared in the reading the poem Ganga Lahari from Jagannath Pandit, and that poem is the most famous poem in celebration of the Ganges. But it was written by an outcast. It was written by someone who fell in love, like many of us do, fell in love with someone they weren't supposed to fall in love with. And because of that, society outcast this person. His professional standing, his social standing, his religious standing was all taken away from him because he fell in love with the wrong person. And so he was outcast, so he went to the banks of the Ganges. And in those of you who've been to India, you'll see when there's oftentimes a sacred river, there are often these steps that go down towards towards the river. And so this particular place, he sat on the banks of the Ganges, and there were 52 steps going down to the river. And as he sat there, despondent, without anyone left in the world that cared for him, he wrote this poem, the Ganga Lahari. And it's said that every time, and the poem is 52 verses, every time he completed a verse, the Ganges would move up one step, and another step, and another step. And finally, when he completed the 52nd verse, the Ganges was at the same level that he was in, and it carried him away on the river, never to be seen again. And I think it's important because we celebrate the Ganges, but again, as I said, this was written by someone who was outcast from society, and still the Ganges embraced him. So what's the lesson here? As I travel the world and speak to different audiences and do things at the UN and other places, it's clear that many people do not feel included in the environmental movement. They feel excluded. They feel like maybe their contribution isn't enough, or they'll be judged, or that environmental policies will affect their lives, their status, or their economic safety. But what the Ganges teaches us is that everyone should feel welcome, that we should create this space for everyone to feel that they have a contribution to make. No contribution is too small, no person is too fallen. Like the river, we should not turn anyone away. And what I've seen is that we may think people oppose climate action, but actually everyone cares about the environment. But many times we speak about this work in a way that people feel like they're spoken down to, or the solutions are tied to broader political or other ideologies. And if we really want to succeed in addressing the environmental crisis, we need to bring everyone to the table. The second story, which we heard briefly about Walden Pond, I won't go over it again, but that was a time of turmoil. America was gripped in a technological revolution, the railroad, the telegraph, political polarization with war, slavery, and Thoreau was caught in the middle of it. And he went to Walden, as was said by Jen, on the teachings of the Gita, but he also went to Walden because his brother had died a few years earlier. His brother John, they were very close. He died of tetanus or lockjaw, as they called it then. And Emerson gave him some land at Walden Pond to live, as Jen said, for 2 years, 2 months, and 2 days. And I love Thoreau's words for why he went. I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately, to front only the essential facts of life, and see if I could not learn what it had to teach, and not, when I came to die, discover I had not lived. He went to really get the essence of life. He built a cabin, grew his own food, ate simply, lived simply, paid attention, also did his laundry at his mother's house, and many other things that he didn't really admit in the book that we all know is true. But he was very attuned to what was going on in the world, and especially here in America. About the railroad, he said, "We do not ride the railroad, but it rides us." And on the telegraph, he said, "We are in a great haste to construct a magnetic telegraph from Maine to Texas. But Maine and Texas, it may be, have nothing important to communicate." Might have been true then, might be true now, I don't know. But the same could be said about our news feeds today, or artificial intelligence. The rate of technological change is overwhelming. And he extended his lifestyle and his philosophy of simplicity to his lifestyle. In the chapter of Higher Laws, he says that he has no doubt that it is part of human destiny and of the human race that in its gradual improvement, people will leave off eating animals. But one part that's overlooked about Thoreau's time at Walden is why he left. We know he was there for 2 years, 2 months, and 2 days. But why did he leave? Why did he emerge back into society, as Jen said? "I left the woods for as good a reason as I went there. Perhaps it seemed to me that I had several more lives to live and could not spare any more time for that one." He left because he had more lives to lead. He recognized that that part of his life was over. He stepped back from the world for 2 years before he could step forward again. And we know the work he did afterwards, work on the Underground Railroad, protesting the wars, going to prison, going to jail, and so on. And his activism has inspired Gandhi, Martin Luther King, and continues to inspire us. today. And as Jen was saying, he also had a deep appreciation for the Hindu worldview. There's a famous line where he says, "The waters of Walden are pure and are mingled with the sacred waters of the river Ganges." And he says, when I go to the river, when I go to the pond, I see the sacred Indian priests performing rituals. So he had this deep spiritual vision of what Walden was in connection to the Ganges and Hinduism. But the lesson here, I think, for us is we all want to act wisely in the world, but sometimes we need to step back from the noise. Not forever and not as escape, but long enough to hear what is calling to us, what matters to us, long enough to simplify, long enough to be grounded in the world. And then, like Thoreau, we step back, we step forward into the world with more lives to live. Can we step back in order to step forward? Now we come to the Cape. We come to the Cape, where we started. I'm not so familiar with this place as much as you, but I've been doing a little bit of research, and Jeff, my manager, has been helping me a little bit. In my imagination, and you'll please correct me if I'm wrong, the Cape has always been a threshold. Geographically, it reaches out into the Atlantic. It's neither fully land or fully sea, and it's caught between two worlds. And it's here where the Mayflower first anchored before it went on to Plymouth, and this is where the New World met the Old World for the first time. The Pilgrims had crossed an ocean to escape the Old World and escape their persecution, and yet, and this is a pattern I want to focus on, they could not shed what they had carried inside of them. The crossing was a real physical crossing, but the old worldview came along with them as they came here, and the old worldview took root in the new world. And we live with those consequences today, the good and the bad. Now, I'm not here to judge them, but I'm here, as I said, to name a pattern, because I think too often our pattern can be similar. Every generation arrives at its own threshold. Every generation faces the same question: can we actually change? Not just in our habits, in our policies, but in how we see and understand the world. Can we shed the worldview that brought us to this moment and allow something new to be born? This is harder than any crossing across the Atlantic. The Pilgrims knew how to sail. What they did not know, and which none of us know naturally, is how to release the assumptions so deep inside of us that we don't even know that they are assumptions. For example, the belief that the natural world exists for all of us to use, or that growth without limit is possible, or that the crisis is someone else's problem to solve. Those are the beliefs that brought us here, but I don't think they'll be enough to get us through. I think we are living in one of these threshold moments in human society. The old world, its economics, its relationship to nature, our understanding about who and what matters, all of that is falling and failing. And something new is trying to be born. We can feel it. We can feel it. New ways of thinking, of acting, and believing. A different understanding of our place with the natural world. Not above it, not separate from it, but within it and responsible to it. The question is not whether the new world is coming. It is. The question is whether we are willing to be part of bringing it in, or whether, like those who came before us, we will stand at that threshold and carry the old world across instead. Can we see the wisdom that is already available to us? Scientists, indigenous communities, faith traditions, young people, from every direction, the same understanding is being offered. Water connects everything. That what we do to one shore happens to every shore. The health of the land and the health of the people are not separate questions. Are we ready to receive it? Can we shed the old in order to birth the new? To me, as an outsider, it seems like the Cape represents this threshold in many ways. The place where the familiar ends and the unknown begins. The place where we have to decide what we are carrying and whether it is serving us or not. The Pilgrims couldn't make that inward crossing, but we're not them. We have seen what the refusal costs us. We have felt it, we are living it today. We do not have the excuse of not knowing anymore. So we covered 3 bodies of water. The Ganges taught us that let's create space for everyone. Everyone feels welcome, valued, no one is turned away. Warden taught us that let's step back before we step forward. Let's find the essential, let's simplify, then we can bring our whole self back into the world. And here the Cape shows us that we're standing on a threshold. The old world and the new world are meeting right here, right now, in this room. What we carry forward from this moment, the choices we make, the actions we take, the community we build, that is our contribution. Thank you.
Stay right there. For our benediction, hold on to what is good, even if it is a handful of earth. Hold on to what you believe, even if it is a tree which stands by itself. Hold on to what you must do, even if it is a long way from here. Hold on to my hand, even when I have gone away from you. Great. Now we will do hymn number 163.
please join us up on the table. And I believe, many of you were at the service earlier where we introduced Gopal, who's the executive director of an organization called Future Faith. He's a Hindu, but also seems to be excellent at bringing all religions to the table. Reverend Michael Reed is an ordained Methodist minister who's the executive director of Interfaith Power and Light. And you know Reverend Kristen Harper. Today's conversation is really going to be about hope, responsibility, and action, and how the spiritual communities, faith communities can be a part of the solution to this great ecological challenge we're facing right now. And we've got pretty good diversity for 4 people up here. I'm Catholic, Protestant, Hindu, and Unitarian Universalist. There's other faith communities on the Cape, but we got some decent diversity here. So I would like to ask you all, from your point of view, why do faith communities matter in dealing with the ecological crisis we're facing? And why don't we go right to left, since I can just pass the mic.
Well, good morning, or I guess good afternoon. A few minutes into the afternoon. Everyone, my name is Reverend Michael Reed. It's a joy to be with you. I'm the executive director at Massachusetts Interfaith Power and Light. We're a nonprofit organization that works with some 250 houses of worship faith communities across the state of Massachusetts to help connect issues of faith and environment, and particularly climate. And so this question of why do we matter in the conversation on climate change is important to me. It's kind of essential to what our organization and many of the other organizations, and I think all of you, because you're here, we want to know, what role do we have to play in all of this? And as I've been thinking about this a lot, I actually really think that faith communities are one of the largest untapped resources for climate action today. And I think because as we look at the environmental movement over the last however many decades, I think we've done an excellent job reaching people with statistics and information on climate. So much so that many people, an increasing majority of Americans, are alarmed or concerned about climate change. But one of the things that I think that are missing, and as we reach people with those information, we're finding we're having a hard time reaching people beyond the people that are already paying attention to our messages, right? And so one of the things that we need to do is to talk within the narrative frameworks that people intuitively know and understand to make the issue of climate change something that feels personal and something that has that they feel like they can take agency on. And faith communities, I think, are actually inherently well set up to do that. We have the organizing infrastructure already in place. We meet in, for most faith communities, weekly or regularly with actual physical buildings like this one, where we can live out our values in ways that we can point at, right? So there's solar panels on the roof. We can use some of those systems of people and places and communication channels to get the messages across. So those are all good things. But I think as we get back to this issue of stories and really helping people understand the kind of ecological crisis and spiritual crisis that we're living in, what we really have are credible messengers. People who can speak in the language and within the frameworks that people can understand. So I can say more about that, but I think those a couple of those things together, the narrative frameworks, and then the last thing is this sense of shared obligation, right, to care for our planet and care for other people.
Repeat the question. We're focusing on why do faith communities matter in this conversation?
You took all my talking points right there. We've both been doing this work long enough that we know. No, that's fine. So I can speak from a lot of the work we do at Future Faith is international advocacy with faith-based organizations. You mentioned the United Nations, the World Economic Forum, kind of speaking into those kind of spaces. And why faith communities matter at that level is because we're seeing a fracturing and a falling apart of an international order that's been in place for about 70 years since the Second World War. And frankly speaking, a lot of people in those spaces, bureaucrats, diplomats, government leaders, are struggling for narratives and stories, or trying to understand why things are happening in the way they are, but also what are the solutions that we need to take things forward. And I think faith communities have always been good about analysing and understanding why humans act the way they do, and then also trying to find hope and inspiration in times of crisis and darkness. And so at the international level, we're seeing a real interest in global leaders leaning into faith and spirituality to make sense and meaning of the moment, but also to find that inspiration, that hope to chart the path forward as well. So that's why we do the work we do. And I think that translates also, and I think that's what you're speaking about at the national, regional, and the local level as well, that we have contributions to make that may seem obvious to us, but actually for many people it's radical. Hope, love, caring for your neighbor, that's radical stuff. It was radical 2,000 years ago when Jesus taught that, and it's radical now as well. So I think that's some of the things we can offer.
Martin Luther King Jr. said that the church is not the master or servant of the state, but it's basically its moral compass. And I think faith communities are moral compasses not only to the government, but to the people who go there. And I think one of the reasons why faith communities are so important is because we are the, how do I put this? We are the examples, not just for each other, but for our families, our communities, of how we can be moral in the world and how we can live out what we say we believe. And I think it's really important to have that message go beyond where we are, but it's one of the places that the message can start. So that's why I think it's important, why faith communities are so important. I understand that around the world, in Western and in the United States, in Western civilization, that religion is not as prominent for everybody. But it still is a grounding and an institution of the world, but particularly of the states. And so I think that we have an obligation to live what we say we believe, but also to speak out and name what's going on, where other people may not have the institution behind them that they can say things.
Thank you, and I'll give this one to you, Reverend Harper, so we can mix things up a little bit, and also because every Sunday you have to do storytelling. But I want to get back to the point that you made, Reverend Reed, about storytelling. You know, people get overwhelmed by the statistics. I know that I can only dip into the science to a certain degree, and then I need to take a break. And for some people, they don't want to even hear that. So how can faith traditions use stories, rituals, and spiritual teachings? I mean, from my own tradition, Catholicism, we have a teacher who, whenever he wants to teach something, he tells a story. You know, a man had 2 sons. A traveler was going down the road and robbers beset him. How can we use storytelling in how we get the message around climate change out?
Well, I think you just said it. I think that we need to use storytelling because the facts don't necessarily get to your heart. And stories connect us in ways that facts and figures do not. And we can use stories both from the many world religions and wisdom traditions to really bring people together. People connect to stories where they may not connect to other things. And so if we, instead of just coming up and saying everything is horrible and this is what's happening, if we use stories from traditions and from people's lives and from, one of the most effective ways that I find to learn, you all, the members here know, I always tell stories because it's a way to connect in that other words just don't do. So I think we can use them as beginnings, middle, and ends of talks, of information gathering. So, that's why.
Just realised I'm stuck between two reverends. I don't know if that means anything or not. Definitely on as Reverend Harper said around storytelling as a means to convey information and mobilize people. One thing I try to do more of is there's a saying, what's your story? What's my personal story? What's your personal story? Because we all have a sense of we're living in our own story. For example, my story is my mum was born in India, my dad was born in Africa, they met in England, I was born in England, I moved to America, I've been here for about 10 years now. That's my story, right? And I'm living that and manifesting that, and I have a dream of how my story ends. And I feel like one reason people resist climate action is because oftentimes the proposed solutions go against the stories that people tell about themselves or their community, about what they are, who they are, where they're going. And so I think if we can tap into an understanding of why do you do what you do, why do you believe, how do you show up in the world, what's the larger story you're living into, and if we can align the climate activism and solutions to that larger story, then we can bring people along on the journey as well.
Yeah, so often when we think about the conversation about climate change, we think about the 7 to 10% of people who are climate deniers. And we get into sort of engagement on that level of, you can even see the sign on the back, climate change is real. So in that kind of storytelling. But actually for most Americans, for most people, for your neighbors and coworkers and friends, there are two myths that we need to change the narrative on. And every single person in this room can help us do that. The two main myths that we need to overcome about climate change. But first, climate change doesn't or won't affect me or people like me. That's the first myth. And the second is, there's nothing I can really do about it. Okay, those are the two main things for most people where we need to talk about. And what's amazing is each one of us can speak credibly to those two main myths. So as we talk about the things we love, the things we care about, does climate change affect me or people like me, my children, my grandchildren? You can talk about whales on the Cape, you can talk about gardening, you can talk about the migration of birds or the things that you love. Someone was talking about skiing the other day and how the weather's affecting. So we can find these different entry points that get us past the polarized political frameworks and into something that's deeply personal, and to help people that we're talking to realize, oh, this is a real issue that really does affect me. So that's the first thing. And that is a sort of a negative valence to it, right? It is, but we have to speak the truth and live in reality. The second is that there's nothing we can do about it. So as we take positive steps for climate action, whether there's policy advocacy or putting solar panels on the roof of our building. I just even was noticing this benefits of solar panels. How powerful is that, right? That this is what this church has been able to, the measurable difference that this action we've taken towards helping the climate. And so that's a kind of personal storytelling we can do. And then in religious communities, we actually have, I think, a secret third option where we can tap into the deep narrative frameworks that people were raised with, that they love, that they trust. So for me, my story is I was raised among conservative evangelicals, which if you look at the data, that's the least likely group of religious Americans to care about climate change. So miracles happen, here I am. But you can actually, and again, not everybody, right? This isn't a silver bullet, but for many people, including evangelicals, you can go into the deep stories of their faith from the Hebrew Bible, the book of Genesis, and talk about God's intention to create the world and to create it good. Right? You can go to the end of the Bible, this mysterious book of Revelation in the Christian tradition, and talk about that the final vision for humanity is not escaping the earth, but actually heaven, the marriage of heaven and earth, as William Blake called it. So you can lean into some of these deep narrative frameworks that really get to the heart and are deeply programmed in the software to help people sidestep some of this sort of abstract debates and get to something that's personable and movable and feels real.
I think each of our panelists has mentioned the cycle of doom that you can get talking about climate change, as well as, Gopal, you mentioned hope. And I'd like to ask you all, before we get into further with the challenges of all of this, what gives you hope right now? Are there examples, large or small, that show that people can move towards meaningful change on environmental issues, particularly climate change? And let's start with Gopal.
Thank you. I'll give two examples. They're not specifically on climate, but they're broadly environmental, if that's okay.
Your choice.
All right, thank you.
Panelist's choice.
Thank you, Reverend. Well, you're not a reverend. So the first small victory, we do a lot of work around biodiversity, nature conservation with faith groups globally. And one of my favorite stories is in England. There was a churchyard project there to save the hazel dormouse, which is like a tiny, tiny mouse, like about this big, which was going extinct in England, and they're found in churchyards across the country. And so the Church of England set up this project to make sure they didn't go extinct, and they did all these projects, and they put in like all the vegetation and the houses and all the things these dormice needed to kind of come back to full life, and they did. And so they're no longer like considered an extinct animal. And so I felt that was just so sweet that like a simple dormouse on a churchyard, needs saving, and they rallied together and they did that. So that's a small thing. Another thing that gives me hope is we're on the Cape, the oceans. Many people, some of you may know, a lot of people don't know that just in January, the United Nations agreed on a new global framework to protect the high seas. It's called the High Seas Treaty, or the Biodiversity Beyond National Jurisdiction. And I think they needed 60 countries to ratify it. I think now they have about 80. And we think of this as a moment, as mentioned earlier, of geopolitical fragmentation and fracturing. But the world came together over the last couple of years and said the high seas need protecting. At the moment, only 1.5% of the high seas are actually protected. So the world came together and said the high seas need protecting. And so there's a new global framework now that 80 countries have signed up to say we need to protect the high seas. And that's a great success story. That's a great story of hope that countries are saying climate negotiations are stuck, but in other areas, oceans, biodiversity, there's significant movement going forward because certain countries are just taking the bull by the horns and just saying, we're not waiting for America or China or the EU, we're just going to move ahead because this is the right thing to do. So that's giving me a lot of hope at the international level. Who's next? That's a lot of power.
The first thing that came to mind when Jeff asked that and the hope happened actually a number of years ago when Sheila Place, Susan Starkey, myself, I think there were more, Susan Brinkerhoff, Jane, I don't think you were there. Started FCEN. And Carol Ewan, yes. And I think that for me, what was so hopeful, FCEN is Faith Communities Environmental Network. And while so often faith communities stay apart, they don't come together. It's hard to do interfaith work with not just ministers, but with lay people. And when FCEN started, it was primarily lay people. I mean, there were, a number of us ministers there, but it was primarily lay people coming together and wanting to work as different faith communities. One, to understand what our faiths say about environmental justice and climate change, but also how we can bridge these gaps of ideology. And so that to me was very hopeful, and it's still very hopeful to me. I believe that the more we work together across differences, the better off we are going to be, the more work we can do. So that really is the thing that gives me the most hope, is the people gathering together. Now, I'm going to get this wrong. there is a group of people. Is it the Association to Protect Cape Cod? Is that what it's called?
Association to Preserve Cape Cod.
Preserve Cape Cod. Yeah, it's when groups of people get together, and it's not an individual thing. It's when people come together to try to make a difference, to try to save what we have, to try to clean up what we have, to try to do better and change legislation. And so for me, that's what gives me hope, is people working together across differences with the same goal and hope in mind.
So I've been thinking about this question a lot, and if it's okay, I actually have a question for Gopal, because I'm going to tee you up for a question, because panel discussions are more interesting when we ask each other questions. But I've been thinking about the ingredients for hope, right? What does it actually take? It's a very abstract idea, hope, and I think a lot of us assume that hope is this sort of passive thing to be received, like, I would like to feel hopeful. Right, which is a kind of, we have this passive awareness that maybe hope will strike me. And we spend our time, our discretionary time, with the cable news on or scrolling our phones, right, these nightmare boxes that glow in our pockets and purses. And then we are wondering why we don't feel very hopeful. And I came across a line from Cornel West where he talks about hope as a virtue. Hope as a virtue. It's something that you aspire to. In fact, I think he goes on to say something that you work towards. And teeing you up a little bit, it's a communal virtue. It's not something that can be fully realized as an individual. And so I've been thinking, what are the ingredients? If you say, okay, so I can't just wait, especially in the time of change and crisis that we find ourselves in, if I'm just waiting around for hope to strike, that doesn't seem like it's going to go very well for me. So how do I actively cultivate hope as a virtue? What are the ingredients or the actions or the particularities that are necessary for me to cultivate hope? And so I've been thinking about what you said about this time and this opportunity that we find ourselves in, and then some of the work that I know you've done on the spiritual elements of navigating burnout, and how do we cultivate hope as communities and as particularly as faith communities? So I'd actually love to hear you speak a bit more about that, about the ingredients of hope, or what it takes to be hopeful in times like these.
Okay. Well, you've opened a can of worms, my friend. Because, I said earlier what gives me hope. But I'll be honest with you that from my study and life of Hinduism, hope is not a construct or a frame that we work with. I've never really seen it come across Hindu teachings, Hindu books. This sense of like something better is, I interpret hope as like something better is just coming or down the road. And that, I really don't think that's a Hindu frame at all. And so what I try to do is maintain enthusiasm, and so I look for like, what are the green shoots, what are the sparks, or what keeps me thinking that yes, we're on the right track, things are moving forward. So enthusiasm and momentum is what I look for, and align myself with those peoples, those organizations, and those initiatives where there is traction, things are good. So I feel for me like that's what I need, I guess, to stay hopeful, but it's the momentum, it's the traction, it's the enthusiasm. So,
Reverend Harper, you want to take a shot at that? What are the ingredients of hope?
What are the ingredients of hope? I just read something yesterday in one of my Substack newsletters about how hope is an action. And so for me, I really believe that unless you're moving forward or trying to do something, even if you take some steps back, there is no hope. I mean, it's hard to get hope when you're doing nothing. So I think that's one of the ingredients of hope. The other thing is, again, you all here know my big thing is community. And community is what gives me hope. I'm not alone in this. I'm not a singular, isolated person. And I want to be with other people that when I'm feeling hopeless, they can help me feel hopeful by stepping forward, by giving me go to this organization, or let's go and do this. That, to me, those two things, community and action, are part of the ingredients of hope. And it's one of the ingredients of hope is it's not optimism. It's not the same thing as optimism. It's not, Unitarian Universalists are both praised for and criticized for our optimistic outlook. Because it appears that there's no foundation for it. So for me, I think there needs to be some reality part of hope, to know where we actually are, and not necessarily know where we're going, but what we want to do together.
Thank you. And you can tell each person on this panel is a person of great faith. I'd like to ask kind of the origin story, kind of go back to that. Reverend Reed started doing that in talking, and I have a special follow-up question for you, given the beginnings of that story. But how does your own faith tradition shape how you think about humanity's relationship to the earth? And Reverend Reed, we'll start with you. I took a class when I did my master's through the BTI at Harvard in UU Religious Education, because the person who taught it was really well known and sounded interesting. And she gave a word that's common in the UU church of the haunting church, because there's so many adult converts to the Unitarian Universalist Church that there's ways in which people will seek out or even suggest things that are echoes of their previous faith tradition. And I'm saying, you grew up with conservative evangelical churches, you're a Methodist minister now. How does your faith tradition inform your faith? But the one you were born with must too. So I'm curious about that.
Yeah, so there's a story to tell. I went to a conservative evangelical Bible college in Chicago, Illinois, called the Moody Bible Institute. We were supposed to read our Bible. Do you know it?
Yes.
Did you go there? Okay, there you go. Wow, this is a small room. I love it. The Moody Bible Institute, we used to say Bible's in our middle name. I assume they do still say that, because it's still there. And we were supposed to read the Bible every day. We were required to attend chapel 4 times a week. And I'll never forget one particular day in chapel, the president of the Bible college got up. This is the president of the whole school, and he's talking about the relationship between earth and heaven. So this idea of getting to the next level. Because Christianity is very much, or many elements of Christianity are very much oriented towards the future. And so he's talking about earth and heaven, and he's trying to talk about this planet Earth, and he says, and I'll never forget, and he says, remember, students, at best, this earth is just a clean bus stop. This earth is just a clean bus stop. In other words, this is a temporary place, a holding place while we are waiting to get somewhere better. It would be nice if you could get it tidy, but ultimately that's not our concern. And even at the time, I remember thinking, sitting in those pews, I was like, that's not right. Like, something about that just struck me the wrong way. And I think it's because deeper still in this, like I said, in the software, in the stories and narratives and myths that I've been raised with, there's this larger narrative in the biblical tradition of something different. So, and if I would have been paying attention and opened my Bible, I was half asleep, but if I would have opened my Bible, I would have found Psalm 24, right, which says, the earth is the Lord's and everything in it. In other words, this in the Christian tradition and the Jewish tradition as well, which makes that verse is also very resonant, that this planet is God's planet, and that we're supposed to be caretakers, or God has not ceded God's claim upon the earth. And so these stories, like I'm saying, from Genesis to Revelation in the biblical traditions, are things that can help decentralize some of these very pernicious, wrong, and harmful narratives within religion. Because I don't think religion has there can be some deeply immoral and harmful stories that we tell. And I think this is one of the other reasons we exist, is to tell a different and better story. So for me, that's a large part of it. But yeah, so for me today, this is a big part of my faith as I've moved on from my upbringing to have a deeper, more ecological understanding of how my faith and the role of faith communities can make a difference on the earth. And then one last thing, I'm going too long. This is also why I love interfaith work. So I personally am a Christian, but I represent an interfaith organization. So we work with Unitarian Universalists and Jewish communities and folk from all over. I told that story that I just told you about the president in a synagogue, and someone, I could hear them lean over and say, "That is so not Jewish." And so this is why we need each other, right? We need each other to have interaction and dialogue that helps us understand our own place in the larger pluralistic framework and grow and deepen our appreciation for each other.
Just repeat the question.
Oh, your own faith tradition and your spirituality, how's it informed for you?
Yeah, thanks, Jeff.
And I've heard him answer that 3 different ways in other situations. So I'm really curious.
That's what you get with a Hindu. You know, you'll get unlimited answers to that. You know? As there are ways to the truth, there are ways to answer this question. For me, it's twofold. First, as was just shared, you know, there are many teachings in Hinduism about the sacredness of the natural world. If you look in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, you know, he is the taste of water, he is the light of the sun. In the Bhagavad Purana, it says the trees are the hairs on the body of God, the rivers are the veins of the body of God. The sun is the eye of God. So there's, Hinduism is replete of, references to the natural world and how the natural world is so sacred. We had the story of the river Ganges earlier. But, I'll be honest, like part of my tension, and I think not part of the tension of Hinduism, because they generally, but also like the Dharmic faiths in general, have less of a philosophy around like how to engage with the reality and the sufferings of the world. There's a saying that some of us say, which is like, we need to get off our asanas. We're very comfortable like going on retreat, that's why Thich Nhat Hanh started, his tradition of engaged Buddhism, because I think a lot of the Dharmic faiths have a strong focus on escaping the world. And, because this, in Sanskrit, it's dukkhalayam ashashvatam, this place is a place of suffering. And so our duty is just to stay here, do a good job, but actually our focus is to get out. And there's not so much teaching around like addressing climate change or things like that, right? At least in contemporary literature. And so for me, what's really helpful for me, and this is why I'm so excited to be here, is Thoreau and Emerson and the Transcendentalists, because they took Hindu and Eastern teachings, infused that with their own Christian Unitarian teachings, and with the founding thought, at least in my mind, the founding thought leaders of America. And so for me, where I am right now is, how does this ancient wisdom from India and the broader Indic traditions, how does that interface with the modern world, with Christianity, with Islam, with Judaism, and other religious traditions? Because no, we don't believe, I don't believe any single tradition has the monopoly on the truth. And it is, when they come together that you start seeing an insight to that truth. So for me, that's kind of where I am right now, is trying to bridge the multiple worlds that I inhabit, physically or spiritually, to bring forth something that is really needed right now.
So I was raised Unitarian Universalist, and not far from Walden. So I grew up knowing about the Transcendentalists, hearing about what their connection to nature, and with a father who was a huge environmentalist. So for me, I have never not understood our stewardship of the earth. It was sort of, my dad was a solar engineer and grew silicon ribbon that actually made the original solar panels. And so we had solar panels so early. We had those rain barrels. We recycled everything. We composted everything. So for me, it's just part of both my faith and my family growing up. The other piece is that Universalists, unlike many Christian traditions, and it sounds like some Hindu traditions, is all about here and now. It's, heaven may be there, but it's making heaven here on earth that is our focus. And so as a result, making heaven here on earth means that we have to take care of our planet and our earth, because if not, it won't be heaven. So I think for Unitarian Universalists who grew up in this faith, we have a different look on environmental work because it's sort of a part of what we always did and always talked about.
Thanks, Reverend Harbert. I really resonated with your story about your father's role in all this. My father was an oceanographer, and when I was 9 years old, he had all these maps of the ocean floor up on the house, and he was showing me something there, and he said, oh, you know, there's this thing called the greenhouse effect, and if we don't figure it out by the year 2000, we're going to be in big trouble. He told me it's in 1974. The science was all there, you know? So thinking about that and that individual action that you mentioned, you know, we have 5 kinds of trash at our house. I don't know how many, maybe there's more that you all have, but we have 5 kinds of trash, and it gets a little frustrating sometimes, but everybody's like, no, we need to do this. That's a drop in the bucket. What large-scale changes do you see as most important? If you could name one major change that we could all make, whether it's the nation, all of humanity, what would that be? And go, Paul, we're going to start with you. We're all counting on you.
I mean, there are many large things to be done, from, you know, transition to renewable energy, to reforming our economic system, to being primarily plant-based. You know, I thought I'd have a few fans for that. So there are many things, but I think what's most important is doing what we can do. Like, I think it was Gandhi who said, what we can do, we must do. And so I think just starting with our own self, our own family, our community is the most important thing. And I think the overwhelm that people feel with the climate crisis, it feels like it's so big, it's so out there, and I can't do anything, so why do I even bother starting? Why do I separate 5 kinds of trash when they're sending rockets up into space or bombing this part of the world, you know, or whatever, you know? But, you know, we all have agency over our own selves, over what we do, our purchasing power and so on. So I think that's the place to start. And everyone's role is going to be different. You know, the teacher's going to have a role to play, the politician, the business leader, the mother, the father, the child. You know, so I think that is the most important thing. An eye on the big stuff, for sure, and advocating and lobbying and voting in the right people for the big stuff. But I think what's most important is starting at home with yourself. I often say, starting with your food. Like 3 times a day, you're making a climate decision. The food that's on your plate, like that's an environmental decision you're making right there and right there. It's the hardest, but if you can start with there, then, you know, the sky's the limit. So start with yourself is what I would say.
I think the thing we can do, there are 2 things that I think we can do is, one, population control. I believe we need to really educate people on how population growth is only adding exponentially to our to climate change. I also think, you know, I say this every Sunday, that the consumption crisis, I don't call it a climate crisis, I call it a consumption crisis. And I believe that the more we consume, the more we are contributing to climate change in many different ways. Because the more we consume, the more stuff is made for us to consume. So we keep adding to it over and over, and it just becomes this horrible thing. And I think there are a lot of people who are stressed, who just go online and buy and buy and buy, because we think it's going to make us happier. And I think one of the things we can do is cut down on how much we're consuming.
Yeah, these are good things, and I think one of the challenges we find ourselves in, both of you have mentioned this in different ways, is that we, as spiritual people, need to find a way to live between sort of the two pitfalls of what have been called triumphalism and despair. And triumphalism on the one side is climate change isn't real, or if it is, we didn't cause it, or if we did, it's going to be fine because we'll mine more minerals from Greenland, right? Or it's the kind of triumphalism that our technology will save us. Although one of the things that gives me hope is the wonderful innovations on technology and the huge dropping costs of solar and renewable energies that are really actually now the most affordable energy producing units on the planet. So there is good technology there, but without also meeting that with changing our patterns of consumption, we're going to be in trouble. So triumphalism on one side, despair on the other, right? We've been talking about hope, and was mentioned, many, especially young people today, feel hopeless or a sense of despair. They feel that the future is scary or that humanity is doomed. We'll see this in global surveys. So we have to find a way to live between those two key things. And then we want to have agency to feel like we control our future. And so some of these things were mentioned well. The other thing that sometimes we're starting to talk about at Mass IPL is about politics and about where you can make your voice matter most. And I think many of us, I mentioned the news cycles and our phones and stuff that are just filling us with despair or rage or triumphalism. Our attention is maybe misplaced, or it's just at least directed to areas in which we have very little influence or control, which is the federal level. Whereas what we're finding here in Massachusetts is you can actually, your voice can make a sizable, outsized difference at the state and the local level. So for example, right now there's a big energy bill before the Massachusetts State Senate. And considering, one of the things they're considering doing is making major cuts, $1 billion worth of cuts to Mass Save, which is a program that helps insulate houses of worship, and I'm sure your homes or offices or other places have used Mass Save. Anyone who's interacted with Mass Save knows it's not a perfect program, certainly not. But one of the things we're asking people to do is to say, hey, if you care about Mass Save, call into your state senator or your representatives and just say, hey, this is something that I want you to pay attention to. I don't want you to cut Mass Save. There's got to be better ways that we can have a more efficient government that doesn't come at the cost of the progress we're making, especially related to equity and justice. So that's something that, and I've talked to people, it is surprising. A few phone calls can really get the attention of a state senator. You can really have a difference there. Or another things we're doing is trying to get people to say yes to clean energy projects that are make good sense and do our due diligence, but to actually come out to town meetings or hearings and say, yeah, I want this in my backyard, or I want this project to move forward, because we know that the people who show up at those meetings are almost always the people who say no or shut it down, and we need to make good progress. So that's another thing that you can do, especially if you're frustrated by the political situation in this country, is to actually look more locally, and you can make a difference.
Yeah, thank you for that. I'd like to end with on a sustaining spiritual note. I'd like each of the panelists to think of one spiritual practice that connects them more to the earth. And we'll start with you, Reverend Reed.
One of the things that we're doing, so Mass APL is an interfaith organization, so people from different faith traditions. And one of the things that we believe is that people need to feel personally connected to nature, to have a larger sense of ecological awareness and the interconnection between all things. So one of the things we've been starting to do, and I would encourage you to do it if you're able to, is to spend more time in green places and green spaces, to spend time with nature. Because again, you have to be the credible messenger to the people in your circles, right? And you can do that by speaking personally about why you care about nature. So spending time in nature is a brilliant and nourishing way to do that. And so we've done, there's a Christian practice called Lectio Divina, divine reading, where you take a text and you read it and you ponder it, and you read it and ponder it, and so on. And we've been doing that with interfaith texts, or you could do it with Emerson or Thoreau, or whichever text speaks to you, to spend some time in nature, to read words that open your eyes and your larger sense of awareness to your own connection with the natural world, and be spiritually grounded and sustained, especially in the times that we find ourselves living in. So if we do that from time to time, we organize guided nature meditations, but that's certainly something that you can also do by yourself wherever you are.
Yeah, that's great. I think I was going to say that one, so I won't. But that's all right. In addition to spending time in nature, one thing for me that really connects me, I'm not a nature person. Like, I'm really not. And Jeff knows that. Yesterday Jeff was like, come, we'll go kayaking. I was like, I didn't bring anything to go kayaking. Can we just go for a walk instead? You know, I love nature to a limit. And I'm honest about that, you know, and I think that's important for us to be honest about. We don't all have to be tree huggers or, you know, live wearing hemp trousers or whatever. I mean, if you want to, you can. But so for me, you know, being honest about where I am with my relationship with nature and what I need and how much I need, and in addition to, like, you know, being with nature, for me what's really important is just having a community of people around me who are doing similar work, who are also maybe more connected to nature than me, or also like having the small wins like the hazel dormouse I mentioned, or people working on the ocean framework and so on. And when I hear those people who are more passionate about nature than I am speaking, makes me feel like, oh, okay, I'm more connected. This is why I do it, because I don't necessarily have that strong relationship, but I'm working with people who do, and I'm getting inspired by their love of the wild, of oceans, of trees, and so on like that. And so for me, having a strong community is really important, because, you know, we can't do this alone, and we need people around us. And so having that kind of sangha, as we would say in Sanskrit and Buddhism, that sangha, that community, is really helpful for me.
I can't really add to that. The only thing I would say is that when I was young, all of the kids had to weed and dig in the garden. And we had both a huge flower garden and a vegetable garden. And I have found that putting my hands in dirt, planting things, pulling stuff up, helps connect me to the earth more than just walking in it. We are so lucky here on Cape Cod. You can go to the ocean, you can go to a beach, you can go in the woods. I mean, you can go to so many different things. But when you're planting and helping in the creation process, there's something magical about that, and it helps you feel connected.
I can't think of a better way to end. Put your hands in dirt. So we thank all of our panelists and the folks who labored to make this great food. And Reverend Harper may have an announcement to finish us up.
No questions?
Are you dying for a question?
I am.
We have only a few minutes, so go ahead.
So I'm Suzanne Wall. So in our FCEN group, we've been really learning from indigenous scientists and inspired by Wampanoag spirituality, and especially inspired by the water protectors. So I wish you could say one thing, not about the individual responsibility, which we're down for, but what's the role of faith in corporate accountability?
You know, if you want me to respond, my immediate response is we have the power to make an impact on corporations if we choose to do that. I grew up, I was a young kid actually, during the time where Nestle was giving the powdered milk to women. It was destroying them. And I can't tell you how many years we did not have Nestle. And lots of people, and it finally worked. It took time, but it worked. So we have to be dedicated and use the power we do have. And if we're not buying things, that's kind of good.
So Bill McKibben has a great line about this, where he says, the best thing that you as an individual can do for the climate is to stop being such an individual. In other words, our individual actions are necessary but insufficient. We do all need to do them. We need to upgrade our heating and systems and our EVs and do all the rest of it and eat lower on the food chain and all this. But we need to lean on institutions. And so again, this is the message that the drum that I'm beating today, which is to say, you are all part of institutions, your faith institutions, and you're doing that here and should be commended for it, to say, as this church, we want to live out our values with things we can point at, solar on the roof and things like this. But the other institutions you're a part of, whether it's your workplaces or your schools, where you bank, it's a big one, or your investments, it's a scary one, talk to Susan. But you are participating in so many institutions, and what we find is when committed individuals can lean on an institution, going to town meeting or talking to your state representatives, to lean on those institutions, there's a multiplier effect. And often those institutions are waiting to hear from the people or can actually be moved if we're motivated. So to think collectively and institutionally, I think, is a huge, huge part of the solution.
We have time, yeah. I mean, one thing I add, I'm on the Faith Council for the World Economic Forum, which is like the premier global space for business leaders, and they have a religious council, and they have 30 councils. They have a religious council, and we're on the faith one. And part of our approach in that space is, as I was mentioning earlier with the story of the Ganges, trying to build a container where everyone feels welcome. I think what I've seen a lot in at least here in the US and in the UK to a certain extent is that faith groups, I find, oftentimes have an antagonistic approach to business, to corporations. And ultimately, these corporations are made up of individuals, mothers, fathers, children, who just want to do the right thing, put food on their table. And so what we're trying to do is kind of shift the conversation a little bit about, it's not us versus them, but how can we move on this agenda together? And I find that we are probably the only stakeholder group that can build that kind of container of love, of trust, of dialogue. So I think that, the protest and everything is good, is needed. The throwing stones and calling them out obviously is needed. But also we need to do the hard work of relationship building and dialogue with these businesses, with these institutions. Because at the end of the day, they want a sustainable, healthy planet to live on just as much as we do. They just want it with increased profits, right? So let's find that container. Let's find a way where we can all move together on a common agenda, rather than oftentimes, I'm not saying that's the approach here, but oftentimes what I see is that antagonistic approach, which just actually furthers the divide, and actually they get more grounded in their work, we get more grounded in ours, and the divide just grows. How do we shrink that as much as possible? That's the approach we're trying to take, but obviously every context is different.
So I just want to close with a few words, not an announcement. May the work we do to help one another and the planet give us hope. May we be active in our work and in our faith so that what we believe is lived out as we go about the world. No matter how hard it may be, we can do this together.